I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the waterline. My boat sat awkwardly tilted, like a drunk at closing time, half buried in the soft lakebed that should have been at least 3 feet under water. I stared, dumbfounded, at the receding shoreline. Then I saw the trail of bootprints leading straight into my boathouse, the door ajar, the reinforced lock snapped clean off. And there she was in the footage, plain as day. Karen, the HOA president with a clipboard and a crowbar, stomping into my private property like she was raiding a pirate ship. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she'd just broken into the control room for the entire lake's water regulation system. And all it took was one switch. One tiny, satisfying flip. I wasn't just draining a lake. I was draining their egos, their arrogance, and every smug pool party they'd ever held on a dock they never had permission to build. You want to play with floodgates, Karen? Let me show you how deep it goes. The day started like any other peaceful morning on my end of Lake Briarwood. Birds chirped lazily, the mist floated just above the water, and my coffee had just the right hint of hazelnut. This lake wasn't just my backyard, it was a legacy. My grandfather, a retired civil engineer and inventor, had owned this plot since the 1960s and installed a complex water management system beneath the boathouse. He used to say the entire lake danced to our rhythm, something the HOA never quite appreciated. I'd kept the system updated, upgraded with solar panels and remote access failsafe. It wasn't just a boathouse, it was a command center. And thanks to Grandpa's stubborn insistence on legal independence, our land and water rights were completely exempt from HOA oversight. That exemption, however, had always been a thorn in Karen's side. She had ascended to the HOA throne like it was a royal inheritance, practically crowning herself with a laminated name badge and clipboard of doom. The first time she came knocking, she brought a welcome basket and a printout of HOA regulations. I politely declined both. The second time, she tried to cite me for unauthorized shoreline landscaping. I reminded her I owned the shoreline. The third time, she brought the police. But they laughed when I showed them the original deed, complete with the grandfathered clauses that made my property untouchable. Each defeat only made her more determined. A week before the break-in, I received a letter in an envelope that practically hissed. Urgent HOA Compliance Review was stamped in red across the top, like a warning label. The contents were even better. Karen had decided, unilaterally, that my boathouse posed aesthetic risks and hydrological imbalances to the community ecosystem. I nearly spit out my coffee laughing. She demanded I attend an emergency compliance meeting. I sent it back with a sticky note that said, "Respectfully, shove it." That must have been her breaking point. The security footage I reviewed that morning showed her and 2 board members, Gary the treasurer and someone who looked like an off-brand mall Santa, prying open the boathouse door with a crowbar. Karen actually shouted, I knew he was hiding something, like she was uncovering a cartel stash instead of irrigation valves and solar panels. I watched in silence as they stomped around the control room, peering into the panels and scribbling in a notepad. Karen tapped one of the main levers like she was trying to figure out how to work a vending machine. That was when I flipped the switch. To be clear, this wasn't some chaotic disaster plan. The system was designed for emergencies, controlled release of water through a secondary channel that bypassed the lake and spilled harmlessly into the old forest ravine behind the properties. Grandpa called it the Floodgate Gambit. Flip one lever, and over the course of 48 hours, the lake would drop by 3 to 4 feet, enough to expose the illegal dock extensions, shore platforms, and concrete patios that the HOA had secretly installed without permits over the years. Karen had tried to play God with the neighborhood. I just introduced her to the actual controls. By the time she noticed, the damage was halfway done. Her prized HOA dock, the one they used for community paddleboard yoga and wine nights, was sitting like a beached whale in the center of a newly formed mud flat. The decorative fountain? Bone dry. I started receiving calls. One neighbor politely asked if there was a plumbing issue. Another accused me of sabotage. Karen's call, though, was my favorite. She screamed so hard I heard her voice crack like a cheap violin. "You drained the lake. You've ruined the HOA. I calmly responded, "You trespassed into my boathouse. I simply activated a maintenance protocol. Check the bylaws you love so much." Page 14, subsection 5. Water flow control may be regulated by private owner if deemed necessary for safety or preservation. The silence on the other end was golden. But it wasn't over yet. By that evening, HOA board members were canvassing the neighborhood like door-to-door disaster salesmen. Karen held a makeshift emergency town hall in front of the clubhouse, her mascara running slightly and hair more frazzled than usual. "He's endangering our community," she shrieked to a small crowd. "That boathouse is a ticking time bomb." But the residents weren't entirely convinced. Photos of her break-in had started circulating. A neighbor named Delia, who had long resented Karen's tyranny, shared my boathouse footage on the community Facebook group with the caption, "So this is what HOA leadership looks like?" Even better, the HOA's landscaping contract had included a clause about maintaining water features. Since the waterline dropped, they were now in breach of their own agreement, and the contractor pulled out. The fountains stopped working. The pond algae bloomed. The koi fish were temporarily moved to buckets. Chaos in the HOA world had a name, drought, and it was bone dry with irony. The final straw came when a local news station caught wind of the situation. A friendly reporter asked if she could interview me about the Great Lake Drain mystery. I agreed on one condition. I brought her into the boathouse, showed her the untouched control panel, the legal documents, and even a plaque Grandpa had installed that read, "He who controls the flow controls the show." The segment aired that evening, cutting between footage of Karen breaking into the boathouse and me calmly explaining the water rights law over a cup of tea. It was titled, "When HOA Meets H2O No." By the end of the week, the lake was lower, the neighborhood was fuming, and Karen was seething. But for the first time in months, I could hear frogs croaking near the ravine again. Peace, in my corner of the lake, had returned. And all it took was a little patience, a little planning, and a well-timed reminder that you don't mess with a man who holds the floodgates in his hand. Karen's voice on the neighborhood Facebook livestream was trembling but still filled with that signature brand of HOA-fueled authority as she stood in front of the deflated clubhouse fountain, surrounded by folding chairs and a half-interested crowd of about 14 residents. She was wearing a windbreaker embroidered with the HOA logo, which looked less like an emblem of leadership and more like the patch of someone cosplaying as community police. "Let's be clear," she declared, slapping a folder of papers for dramatic effect. "This was not a natural drainage. This was intentional sabotage." She glanced into the camera with a mix of indignation and desperation, clearly trying to regain control of the narrative. Behind her, someone coughed loudly, followed by a faint murmur of disagreement. The crowd wasn't buying it like they used to. And from my dock, watching the live stream while sipping my coffee, I couldn't help but notice how poetic it was. The same people who once cowered under Karen's HOA fines were now starting to question whether the emperor had any clothes, or legal grounds. The panic began when HOA board members discovered the full extent of the consequences. The lowered lake level had exposed not only the rickety dock Karen was so proud of but also a host of unauthorized structures around the shoreline. The floating gazebo that Gary, the HOA treasurer, had insisted was community enhancement now sat lopsided in the mud, its support beams creaking like an old rocking chair. Half-buried cinder blocks, PVC piping, and even discarded party decorations surfaced. What had once been a picturesque lakeside community now looked like a forgotten construction site. One homeowner emailed me asking if I was going to refill the lake anytime soon, as if I had knocked over their glass of water and owed them a refill. I responded with a screenshot of the city's water regulation document. It clearly stated that maintenance-based water redirection was permitted by the private property owner, meaning me, without HOA approval, especially in response to unauthorized alterations. Karen doubled down. She declared that the HOA would take swift action against my so-called reckless behavior. She claimed I had compromised the safety of the lakefront, ignored community harmony, and endangered property values. She even accused me of being emotionally unstable, in a comment thread that she later deleted after being ratioed into silence. What Karen didn't anticipate was that people were finally waking up. I had quietly earned respect from longtime residents, especially older ones who remembered my grandfather's contributions to the neighborhood. He built the original flood spillway, after all, and kept the lake healthy for decades. Most of them remembered when the HOA had been a potluck organizing committee, not a miniature dictatorship. Some of the more vocal neighbors began to speak out. Delia, the same woman who posted the footage of Karen's break-in, organized a petition demanding a financial audit of the HOA. Her caption under the link said, "If she can break into private property, what's stopping her from breaking into our accounts?" It gained nearly 70 signatures within 24 hours. Another resident uploaded drone footage showing the mud-stained ruins of Karen's dock contrasted against my untouched shoreline. It went mildly viral in local news forums, tagged with the phrase, Karen's mudbath. She was becoming less a symbol of order and more a meme of mismanagement. Still, Karen tried to gain the upper hand. One morning, I woke to the sound of loud banging and unfamiliar voices near the path that ran behind my boathouse. I walked down to find 3 men in safety vests, wielding shovels and pickaxes, digging up the trail. When I asked who authorized the work, one of them grunted that they were here on easement rights enforcement from the HOA. I called the sheriff immediately. By the time the deputies arrived, I had already produced land ownership documents that proved there was no such easement. The workers packed up and left in a hurry. One of them mumbled something about never trusting HOA ladies again. The sheriff took one look at the documents and muttered, "This is going to be fun in court." Later that day, Karen emailed me directly. Her tone was acidic but restrained, the kind of professionalism you get when someone is trying not to scream into their keyboard. She accused me of obstructing community maintenance efforts and threatened legal action. I responded with a forwarded email from the sheriff's department, confirming the trespass report. I also included a time-stamped image of the hidden boathouse camera capturing her standing directly under a sign that read, "Private property. No entry." No words. Just facts. Karen didn't reply. She did, however, hold another emergency HOA meeting. This time with a lawyer present on a laptop screen who looked perpetually like he regretted accepting her case. That night, someone anonymously dropped a copy of the original property blueprints and legal annotations in my mailbox. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the contents were gold. Not only did they confirm my grandfather's full water rights authority, but they also included a scanned page of HOA meeting minutes from 2003. In it, a previous HOA president stated, for the record, that Lot 17, my property, was officially exempt from all future architectural and environmental restrictions due to its original founding title. It wasn't just immunity. It was full autonomy. I scanned the document and saved multiple copies, both on cloud storage and in physical form. I had no doubt Karen would escalate. The next escalation came in the form of propaganda. Flyers began appearing on neighborhood doors titled, "Warning, Boathouse Hazard." It painted me as a rogue homeowner using outdated infrastructure to manipulate the lake for personal amusement. It warned of property devaluation, mosquito breeding, and potential flooding. My favorite line was, "Eli's boathouse system has never been reviewed by a certified hydrologist." The irony, of course, was that I was a certified hydrologist. In fact, I held 2 patents in adaptive water management systems and had consulted for both municipal and private bodies across the state. I didn't respond publicly, but someone else did. An old colleague of mine, who now worked with the county's water board, saw the flyer and posted a scathing rebuttal on Nextdoor, complete with my resume and credentials. She even added a sarcastic touch. Next time the HOA wants to fight science, maybe pick a weaker target. The public momentum was shifting. Karen's once firm grip on the neighborhood was slipping through her fingers like the lake water she had tried to control. She started looking overmatched and overexposed. Her long Facebook rants started receiving laughing emojis instead of likes. Her inner circle began shrinking. Even Gary, her devoted treasurer, began showing cracks in his loyalty when pressed about how much HOA money had gone into those docks now sitting on dry earth. But Karen wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. In a final, desperate move, she initiated a formal complaint with the county, alleging that I had caused environmental harm through intentional manipulation of natural resources. It was a clever attempt to bypass HOA authority and drag me into a bureaucratic mess. What she didn't know, however, was that the county inspector assigned to the case had trained under my guidance during her early internship days. When she arrived to inspect the system, she gave me a subtle wink and said, "Looks like your floodgate finally flushed out the nonsense." The inspection was flawless. The system was up to code, the emergency channel was working as intended, and the environmental impact was positive, actually preventing overflow damage that could have occurred with the rising rains. I asked if Karen's complaint would have any effect. The inspector just shook her head and said, "Only on her credibility." By the end of the week, HOA board members started privately reaching out. They didn't want a war. They wanted peace, and frankly, they were tired of Karen's obsession with my boathouse. One even joked, "If the lake had a mayor, it'd be you, and we're okay with that." I smiled politely, knowing full well that Karen was about to make one last desperate mistake. And this time, it wouldn't just sink her reputation. It might just bury the whole HOA under the mud it tried to hide. It started with a glint of rust and a low groan from beneath the lakebed. When the water dropped far enough to expose the western shallows, something peculiar emerged, a square, metallic object covered in algae and half-submerged in the muck. At first, it looked like an old toolbox or maybe a weathered crate from a lost fishing expedition, but as I stood at the edge of the water, binoculars in hand, I saw the chain. A thick, heavy-duty chain was looped through a bolted handle and latched with a rusted padlock that looked like it had been shut for decades. I didn't say anything at first. I just took a few photos, zoomed in on the faded serial numbers, and tucked them into a folder on my laptop. Because whatever it was, it hadn't been meant to resurface, and that meant it probably belonged to the very people now screaming at me for exposing it. Word spread faster than I anticipated. A teenage kayaker from the other side of the lake tried to paddle out to the object and got stuck in the mud. His dad had to wade in waist-deep with a rope to pull him out. They were angry at first, but the teen had taken a blurry photo of the object and posted it online with the caption, "What's in the HOA locker?" The post went viral in the local Reddit and Facebook group. Within hours, speculation exploded. Some thought it was a time capsule. Others claimed it might be an old HOA project gone wrong. One user joked that it probably contained the original HOA president's body, which led to an entire thread of "Murder HOA" conspiracy memes that would have been hilarious if it wasn't for what came next. The local news station returned. This time, they weren't just interested in my boathouse. They wanted footage of the strange object rising from the lakebed. A drone operator caught aerial views, revealing the object was much larger than anyone thought, nearly the size of a large storage trunk. The news anchor dubbed it the Mudlock Mystery. Reporters asked if the HOA knew anything about it. Karen, of course, denied any knowledge, but her panicked facial expression said otherwise. She looked like someone who just realized the closet she'd stuffed full of secrets had just had its door blown open. 2 days later, the county sent an environmental hazard team to inspect it. They arrived in hazmat suits and gloves, with equipment that looked far too serious for something supposedly benign. I stayed on my dock, camera in hand, while a small crowd gathered along the opposite shore. The officials pried open the trunk using bolt cutters, and even from where I stood, I could see the moment one of them recoiled. One of the workers shouted into his radio, and another ran to the van. Something had gone very, very wrong. That night, the county issued a statement confirming that the trunk contained several corroded barrels labeled with chemical codes dating back to the 1990s. It wasn't just trash. It was industrial pesticide and herbicide concentrate, some of it banned for over a decade. The labels had faded, but serial numbers matched shipments recorded to a landscaping contract under the HOA from 30 years ago. Worse, the documents showed those materials had never been disposed of properly. Instead, they had been sealed in barrels, chained shut, and dumped in the lake. Karen's attempt to paint me as an environmental threat had just backfired in the most ironic way possible. The revelation ignited a second wave of outrage. Older residents started digging through storage bins and paper boxes for HOA records, and several found meeting notes that hinted at emergency material handling or temporary aquatic storage from old board president. One woman, a former HOA secretary named Beverly, contacted me directly. Her email was short but explosive. She had minutes from a meeting where then-President Walter Lang had ordered non-disclosure of certain hazardous material contracts and authorized quiet removal by aquatic disposal. She attached a scan page with Lang's signature and 3 other names, one of which was Karen's uncle, who had been HOA treasurer at the time. It all came together in a chilling mosaic. Karen wasn't just a control freak. She was the heir to a hidden scandal, trying desperately to maintain power long enough to bury the past again. Unfortunately for her, the lake had other plans. I forwarded Beverly's email and attachments to the Environmental Task Force and the local reporter I had worked with. They ran the story the next day with the headline, HOA Lake Scandal, Toxic Truth Buried in the Mud. The accompanying photos showed barrels being loaded into a containment truck and Karen looking pale and speechless outside the clubhouse. Still, she tried to spin it. She went live on Facebook, sitting on her patio, dressed like she was filming a wellness vlog, and claimed that the barrels were planted by someone with a vendetta against community order. She hinted at my boathouse again, claiming that I had always been suspicious and that this could be part of a broader plan to discredit the HOA. But her timing was tragic. Mid-livestream, her connection glitched, and when it came back, her face was frozen mid-sentence while the comments filled with ridicule. One user posted a side-by-side screenshot comparing her to a malfunctioning animatronic. Others flooded the feed with barrel emojis. Her rant unraveled into chaos, and she ended the stream abruptly. It was the digital equivalent of slipping on a banana peel in front of a stadium crowd. The next HOA meeting was awkwardly quiet. For the first time, Karen didn't lead it. The vice president, a man named Marcus who had kept his distance until now, took the podium and called for a vote of emergency reorganization. The resolution passed quickly. Karen was officially suspended pending investigation. She didn't speak. She just stood up, knocked over her chair, and walked out without looking at anyone. No clipboard. No windbreaker. No control. You'd think that would be the end, but Karen's exit wasn't an act of surrender. It was a tactical retreat. 2 days later, I received a letter, not from the HOA, but from a private law firm representing Karen directly. She was suing me for defamation, emotional distress, property value loss, and malicious environmental disruption. The letter read like a soap opera script, full of dramatic language and phrases like wanton sabotage and deliberate emotional endangerment. I laughed so hard I dropped my sandwich. But it meant war. Legal war. I contacted my attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Ray who specialized in land disputes and HOA retaliation. She reviewed the footage, the county findings, and the HOA minutes Beverly had provided. Her conclusion was simple and satisfying. She's cooked. You want to counter-sue? I didn't hesitate. We filed a counterclaim for trespassing, attempted fraud, defamation, and unauthorized entry. The surveillance footage alone was damning. Add to that the leaked documents, the environmental hazard report, and Karen's own live meltdown, and we had a case strong enough to crush granite. Ray even suggested we make it a public trial. She said the spectacle might discourage future HOA tyrants from thinking they could do the same. I agreed. Karen wanted war in the shadows. I was about to drag her into the sunlight. While we prepared the legal side, something unexpected happened. The community shifted. Neighbors who had once watched from a distance began dropping by with stories, old HOA newsletters, and quiet words of support. One man brought over a bottle of bourbon and said, "I never liked that dock anyway." A young couple offered to help clean up the shoreline. Delia, the neighborhood firebrand, told me she was running for HOA president just to burn the whole mess down and start over. As I stood one evening on my dock, watching the moonlight bounce off the half-restored lake, I realized something. I hadn't just flipped a floodgate. I had cracked open a vault of buried truth, and now, every lie Karen tried to drown was surfacing with a vengeance. And soon, in court, she'd have to face every one of them with the whole neighborhood watching. The courtroom buzzed with the kind of tense anticipation usually reserved for small-town scandals and high-profile divorces. Folding chairs creaked beneath the weight of neighbors who suddenly remembered how much they cared about HOA business. Even people who hadn't attended an HOA meeting in years now sat on the edge of their seats, whispering and trading speculations as if watching a local version of a courtroom drama unfold in real time. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table dressed like she was auditioning for a soap opera role titled Wronged Heroine. Her lawyer, a smug man with an oversized briefcase and a Bluetooth earpiece that he never removed, flipped dramatically through documents like he thought cameras were watching. Across from them, I sat quietly beside Ray, who leaned back casually, legs crossed, a stack of printed evidence thicker than the community rulebook Karen loved so much. The judge, a firm but fair woman with the calm voice of a preschool teacher and the gaze of someone who didn't tolerate nonsense, began the proceedings. Karen's lawyer led with an emotional argument about stress, loss of community respect, and the collapse in property values allegedly triggered by my malicious flooding of the lake. He used words like targeted harassment, environmental manipulation, and neighborhood betrayal. He even claimed Karen now suffered from insomnia due to the fear of further sabotage. Karen added her own flair, dabbing her eyes with a tissue every few seconds as if hoping for tears to appear by sheer force of will. Her monologue included phrases like emotional terrorism and destruction of harmony. I didn't say a word. Ray didn't even blink. We just waited. Then it was our turn. Ray stood slowly, slid our evidence folder across the table, and asked the clerk to distribute the content. The judge began flipping through printed screenshots, photos of the barrels being removed from the lake, copies of the HOA's old meeting minutes, the footage of Karen breaking into my boathouse, and even the transcript of her disastrous livestream. Ray didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. Her words were sharp, deliberate, and each sentence carried weight. She outlined the full timeline: Karen's trespass, her illegal entry into a privately owned utility structure, the lies spread online, and the county's findings that confirmed the flooding was a legal, environmentally responsible act to prevent structural damage caused by illegal HOA construction. Then Ray dropped the real bombshell. Karen's phone data had been subpoenaed during discovery, and inside her chat history was a string of messages to Gary and another board member that spelled out her entire plan. Not only had she known about the old barrels, but she had also ordered the break-in specifically to try to shut down the system before the water level revealed the buried evidence. The courtroom went dead silent. The judge adjusted her glasses and asked Karen's lawyer if he'd like to respond. He stammered something about context and confidentiality, but it didn't matter. The text messages were damning, and everyone in the room knew it. Karen's composure cracked. She stood abruptly, knocked her chair into the table behind her, and launched into a panicked tirade. "He's manipulating this whole thing. He set me up. That lake was fine until he drained it." The judge warned her to sit down or be held in contempt. She sat, but the damage was done. No amount of fake tears could hide the truth now. The judge ruled in our favor. My countersuit was validated, and Karen was ordered to pay damages for trespassing, defamation, and legal costs. She was also issued a restraining order preventing her from coming within 50 feet of my property, including the lake perimeter. But even more satisfying was the court's mandate for the HOA to conduct an internal audit and restructure its leadership. Karen was officially removed from any future HOA activity, barred from holding a board position for the next 10 years. The gavel hit the block, and just like that, her reign crumbled. After the ruling, a crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Some reporters, but mostly neighbors, shook my hand, clapped me on the back, and thanked me for standing up to her. Delia, now officially a candidate for HOA president, gave a short interview promising transparency and accountability. Gary disappeared without a word, slipping out the side entrance like a man trying to outrun a headline. The next morning, the neighborhood looked different. Not physically, but the tension had lifted. Lawn signs supporting Delia's HOA reform slate popped up in front yards like wildflowers after a storm. People smiled more, waved more. Some even asked me how the lake system worked, genuinely interested instead of suspicious. I gave a few casual tours of the boathouse, showing the safe flow mechanisms, the solar panels, and how it all helped regulate the ecosystem instead of harm it. The same system Karen had tried to label dangerous was now something of a community marvel. And then there was Karen. Or more specifically, what was left of her influence. She stayed quiet for a week. No Facebook rants, no HOA flyers, no sudden rule enforcement visit. Her pristine dock, now partially dismantled per the judge's environmental correction order, sat eerily abandoned. Rumors swirled that she was planning to move. A realtor's car was spotted in her driveway, and someone said they heard her shouting about betrayal and lawsuits through an open window. She became a ghost with a Wi-Fi signal. Occasionally, a passive-aggressive post would slip into the community board, made by someone with a suspiciously familiar writing style and a username like LakeLover1995, but nobody took the bait anymore. My favorite moment came during the first post-trial HOA meeting. Delia was officially voted in as interim president by a wide margin. She opened the meeting with a single sentence that made the room erupt with laughter. "Let's all agree that breaking into boathouses is off the table moving forward." I didn't attend that meeting in person. I watched it from the dock, beer in hand, sun setting over a lake slowly rising back to healthy levels. The repairs had begun, but they were on my timeline now, not the HOA's. I spent the next few days restoring the final components of the water system. The floodgate lever that had sparked it all was now fitted with a smart lock, camera monitoring, and an encrypted access panel. Only I could operate it, and only when needed. The emergency spillway had already done its job, and now the ecosystem was recovering. Fish returned, birds circled again, and even the frogs resumed their nightly chorus. For the first time in weeks, things felt balanced, natural, peaceful, until Karen made her last move. It happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I was checking the southern pipe valve when I heard splashing from the far side of the lake. I looked up and there she was, standing in a bright orange kayak, shouting some kind of protest slogan as she paddled furiously into the restricted area of the still draining zone. It was a pathetic spectacle. Her paddle flailed. Her direction wobbled. She hit a pocket of soft mud and toppled sideways, landing face-first into a mixture of clay, algae, and pure poetic justice. Several neighbors caught it on video, and within hours, the clip was uploaded online titled Karen's Final Splash. That was the last time I saw her on the water. She moved out 2 weeks later. A moving van came early in the morning. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. No farewell email. Just a vacant driveway, a padlocked gate, and one bitter legacy slowly fading under the weight of her own decisions. The lake recovered. The HOA transformed. And I, the man with the floodgates, remained exactly where I started. Not out for revenge. Not seeking control. just guarding the water, the land, and the memory of a grandfather who had always known what true power was. Not the ability to control others, but the wisdom to control yourself when others try to steal it. By the time the spring rains returned, the lake was nearly full again. Not from panic or vengeance or spite, but from careful, calculated regulation through the same floodgate system Karen had once broken into, thinking it held danger instead of balance. I stood on the dock one morning, boots wet with dew, listening to the soft trickle of water flow from the controlled channel I had reopened, watching sunlight stretch across the surface. For the first time in months, the water looked calm, not just in motion, but in spirit. There was no frantic HOA member stomping around claiming emergency powers, no screams about violations, no backdoor meetings in folding chairs. There was just the lake, and the community finally learning to respect the natural flow of things. After Karen's humiliating exit and the legal storm that followed, something strange happened in the neighborhood. People started actually enjoying where they lived again. The tension that had coiled around every mailbox and bulletin board was gone. Delia, now officially HOA president by unanimous vote, transformed the meetings into cooperative forums rather than disciplinary councils. She brought in environmental consultants to assess the lake restoration, organized trash cleanup days, and even hosted an open Q&A session where I was invited to explain the workings of my Boathouse system. I was hesitant at first, unsure if people really wanted to understand or were just looking for an excuse to poke holes in my process. But the turnout surprised me. Dozens of residents showed up, many bringing their kids, all curious and respectful. I rolled up the Boathouse doors that afternoon, revealing the once-feared control system. No lasers, no secret buttons, just levers, pressure valves, and a solar-powered dashboard designed to prevent flooding and preserve water health. I walked them through each function, even demonstrated a simulated overflow test using the smaller channel. The kids were fascinated. One of them asked if it was like a superhero base. I smiled and told him it was more like a guardian's tower, meant to protect, not attack. Delia stepped forward afterward and shook my hand in front of everyone. That handshake marked a turning point not just for me, but for how the entire community saw the lake, and each other. But there were still remnants of Karen's legacy hidden in the landscape. One afternoon, while cleaning the newly exposed shoreline near the eastern bend, a group of volunteers unearthed several more rusted pipes and concrete slabs buried under a layer of vines and mud. It became clear that the old HOA board had been building without permits for years, adding beautification structures that weren't just illegal but potentially damaging to the ecosystem. The county sent out a survey team and, after confirming multiple violations, issued a formal warning to the HOA, retroactively penalizing the previous board for unreported shoreline tampering. It wasn't a massive fine, but it was enough to cement the final nail in the coffin of Karen's administration. Her name became a cautionary tale, the subject of whispered jokes at BBQs and eye rolls at block parties. Even new residents were given the story as a kind of local legend. To commemorate the changes, Delia proposed something bold, transforming Karen's half-collapsed dock into a public educational site. At first, I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. She had a local carpenter reinforce the base, adding safe walkways, benches, and informational boards about water regulation, ecosystem preservation, and the history of the lake, complete with a timeline of events from my grandfather's floodgate system to the infamous barrel discovery. And right at the center of it all stood a large wooden plaque mounted above the stairs. It read, "This is where arrogance sank." It became something of a quiet attraction. School field trips visited. Journalists wrote follow-ups. One local artist painted a mural showing the lake split in half, one side green and vibrant, the other dry and cracked, captioned "Balance takes courage." As for me, I returned to my routine, though it now came with the occasional knock on the door from neighbors asking for advice about water pumps, drainage, or even solar systems. I never turned them away. It felt good to contribute without having to fight for every inch. The anger that once bubbled beneath my calm exterior had evaporated. Not because I forgot what Karen had done, but because I'd outlived her chaos. Her attempts to control, to rewrite boundaries and twist the rules, had drowned in the very mud she tried to hide. The final piece of restoration came quietly. One morning, before sunrise, I activated the last segment of the water channel, returning the flow from the emergency spillway to its normal state. The controls whirred softly, then clicked into place. The flow adjusted, balancing itself within seconds. It was a simple motion, but it felt like closing the final chapter in a long, dramatic book. I stood for a moment longer, hand resting on the control lever, thinking about everything that had unfolded because one woman couldn't stand not being in charge. A few weeks later, Delia hosted a neighborhood gathering at the newly renovated dock. There were lanterns strung between posts, music playing, and even a catered taco truck parked near the clubhouse. People laughed, shared stories, and, most notably, no one argued. No one cited obscure regulations or handed out warning letters. It was just a community finally learning how to be one. During a toast, Delia raised a glass and thanked everyone for believing in change. Then she pointed toward me and said, "And to Eli, for reminding us all that control is a privilege, not a right." The crowd clapped. I nodded, humble but proud. As the evening faded and stars scattered across the lake's mirror-like surface, a few people lingered behind. I sat with them on the dock's edge, legs dangling above the water, listening to stories about how different things used to be. One man confessed he'd been scared to speak out during Karen's rule, afraid of retaliation. Another neighbor said he felt guilty for not standing up when he saw her abusing power. I told them what I had told myself many times, that silence only lasts until someone makes a little noise. And sometimes that noise comes from the unlikeliest place, like a floodgate being released. Before I headed back that night, a teenage girl who had been quiet most of the evening approached me. She said she'd seen everything unfold and asked how I stayed so calm. I thought about it for a second and told her the truth. Because I knew I was right. And when you know that, you don't have to yell. You just have to stand your ground. She smiled, thanked me, and ran off to join her family. That was the legacy I wanted. Not the lawsuit, not the headlines, not the viral videos. Just the idea that one person, standing calmly against chaos, could make a difference. That doing the right thing didn't require permission, only conviction. That integrity, like water, will always find eye.